Far Cry 5 is Ubisoft's latest addition to the Far Cry franchise. This time set in Montana, you find yourself dealing with a militarized cult that has begun blocking roads and cutting off communications, effectively cutting off a section of Montana from the outside world. You play as a deputy sent with U.S. Marshals and the county sheriff's department to apprehend the cult leader, Joseph Seed. Things quickly turn to the shitter as you realize these cult members are armed to the teeth and you're quickly outgunned as there's tons of them. They take down your chopper, separating you from your team in a hostile Hope County with no allies. And like any other Far Cry game, your role will be to unite the resistance of Hope County against the cult. The game is split into 3 regions, each controlled by one member of the Seed family, and they all have their own different motivations and beliefs and ways in which they try to force their radicalized Christian faith on people. You've got John Seed, who forcibly indoctrinates people through baptism. You've got Jacob Seed, who believes in the strong shall survive, survival of the fittest. You've got Faith Seed, who uses drugs to manipulate people. And this difference really helps to make each region feel particularly different. Like going into Faith's area, for example, has tons of drug cartel type of influences, where there's all sorts of drug farms and things around the place. However, despite all this work into differences and beliefs and motivations for each of them, they don't come across as very interesting in their own right. And as a result, they're not very memorable. The story as a whole is interesting enough to keep playing, but it's not really that great or memorable that it's going to leave you with a lasting impact. The characters come across as more laughable than serious, and at times it can feel like the game doesn't know what it wants to be, a serious game or a comic book game, which is kind of odd given that there's some really serious dialogue at times. I will say that the main villain in this game is really interesting. Joseph Seed, who is played by Greg Bierk in real life, is actually really interesting. He plays this very creepy, mysterious guy that just gives you almost sort of a god complex. It's just very unfortunate that he doesn't see much screen time in the game. As far as the gameplay goes, it's more or less what you'd expect from a Far Cry game, with some minor changes. The shooting mechanics are decent, with a few exceptions. The recoil on some of the guns in particular feels a little bit off, some of the longer ranged guns, but for the most part it feels pretty good, and it's basically what you'd expect from a Far Cry game. You have tons of different weapons like RPGs, grenade launchers, assault rifles, pistols, even stealth weapons like bows to use. A welcome change to Far Cry 5 is the removal of the climbable radio towers in the previous games. Now you just drive around rather than having to find those radio towers that you would climb to unlock the points of interest to go to. They also removed one of the progression aspects from the previous game, so you no longer go around trying to hunt animals to get better equipment that you could craft. Instead, you just basically upgrade things by picking perks, like getting more weapon slots and so forth. There's also a number of different companions you can recruit as you play the game, like you can get an attack helicopter, an attack plane, or a stealth person. The companions are pretty well done for the most part, and I really like how they gave you a lot of options between what type of playstyle you want to be, whether you want to blow everything up or go more stealthy. And of course, if you want to, you can just play the game entirely by yourself and not play with any of the companions, if you'd rather not have any AI following you around helping you. It's worth mentioning that the AI in this game is pretty terrible. You pretty much have to play on hard to get any sense of challenge. They're just absolutely brain dead and do the stupidest things in the world. There's a ton of different vehicles in this game as well, which is really cool. You can drive everything from boats, trucks, cars, sedans, ATVs, airplanes, and helicopters. And you can even equip some of these with weapons. You can get like a truck that has machine guns on it, or a helicopter with rockets, or an airplane with bombs and machine guns. Though it is worth mentioning that as cool as all these are, airplanes in this game are absolutely friggin' worthless, because attack helicopters are just so much better, because attack helicopters move at more or less the same speed as an airplane. Airplanes have to constantly be moving, so you can just park your helicopter and pummel an area to death, while the airplane has to go around cruising at a really slow speed that feels more like a glider than an actual plane. Not to mention, you can really easily take down attack planes with a helicopter because of how damn slow they are. It's ridiculous. Now you've got 2-player co-op in this game, which is a lot of fun, though one thing that does suck is that you're restricted in how far apart you can be. You have to be in a very constricted area, and progression is not carried into the other person's game, which is really disappointing. So if I join into a friend's game, and then he progresses through the story, that doesn't update my game. So I have to go back and do all the same missions again, which is just stupid. I did run into quite a few bugs as well, which is worth mentioning. So sometimes missions wouldn't update properly, or I couldn't talk to an NPC because they thought they were still stuck in combat, so I'd have to shoot them, revive them just to talk to them. There's a bunch of just small things like this that just kind of really stick out as annoying. And one thing this game has a huge problem in is when it comes to the amount of enemies. You can't walk like 10 feet in this game without being attacked or running into some kind of enemy. It's ridiculous. It's like the game is afraid to allow you to relax for 2 seconds. It thinks you're going to be bored or something. There's some gunfight or explosion or NPC being held hostage everywhere, constantly. You can't escape it at all. From a sound perspective, this game is pretty good. Most of the guns, the explosions, everything sounds pretty good. The soundtrack as well is fantastic. There's a couple really nice radio tracks that you'll hear as you're playing the game. Graphically, Far Cry 5 is decent, but it's not going to blow your mind away. It's definitely not the best game I've ever played when it comes to graphics. The guns, vehicles, and especially the characters all look pretty great though, and I really can't complain. It's definitely above average. And then there's multiplayer, which is the worst part of this game, and I just don't understand why it's here. You've got a mixture of modes like cooperative and team deathmatch, but it just feels all thrown together and actually well designed at all. It comes with a fantastic map editor, which is really awesome and allows you to create really cool maps with older Far Cry games, content, Watch Dogs, Assassin's Creed, so you can mix assets from those games to create your own interesting maps. Players can then share their online maps and play them with other people. It's a cool idea, but doesn't really work well overall. People have created some pretty awesome things like replicas of Call of Duty and Counter-Strike maps, but the game's design just doesn't suit multiplayer at all. It's just not fun. It's not satisfying or engaging at all. Overall, Far Cry 5 is a 15 to 20 hour game for the main story alone, which is a lot of content. It doesn't stray much from the formula, so if you didn't like a previous Far Cry game, you're probably not going to like this game. But if you're a fan of Far Cry 3 or 4, you're going to love this game. It's basically the same exact thing, just in a different setting with some new stuff to kind of freshen up the formula. It is a bit buggy though, but it wasn't enough to really drive me insane or to really make me throw this game out completely. It was a fun experience, and I would say it's worth checking out. Far Cry 5 gets a 7 out of 10.